It is said that a tale of souls and swords is eternally retold, but who could be the storyteller? Why, him of course. Tekken 8 is here. We reviewed it, and it's glorious. Check the description. It's the first mainline Tekken release that's coming directly to home consoles without a prior arcade release, and so ever since Bandai Namco revealed the first trailer to the world, they have been maintaining the hype with consistent character trailers, a fairly mild #SaveTheD8 gameplay presentation, and a lot of tests and demos, with the developers even attending various events in person, showcasing the opening movie with the DLC announcement. And the hype clearly worked. We constantly see a wave of comments and tweets from people who decided to finally give Tekken a shot. And it's not just regular people like you and me, masters and champions from other games like Sonic Fox and Punk shower Tekken with praise, fully intending to try it on release. And having tried the game ourselves, we have little doubt that Tekken 8 will be a huge success. But it could be a success not only for the Tekken series, but also for Soulcalibur. Soulcalibur is a storied series that held the fort for 3D fighting games alongside Tekken and a few others. It has seen its fair share of ups and downs, but the state the 7th mainline installment was left in doesn't really instill any hope for a bright future. The Soulcalibur series began with Soul Blade, or Soul Edge if you're in Japan, and was directed by Toraki Konishi. It was yet another Namco experiment that grew into a full-fledged game, much like Tekken. As is the case with many future entries, the first one was incredibly advanced for its time. It had fluid gameplay that introduced the series' iconic 8-way movement and guard impacts. The visuals were also technically better than those of Tekken 2, having almost none of the sister series' blockiness. The very next entry is a great example of how success and failure go hand in hand with this series. Soulcalibur, a sequel to Soul Blade, was developed as a launch title for Sega's Dreamcast console. By all accounts, it was a great game, topping several best of all time charts even to this day. But the decision for the game to be a Dreamcast exclusive was a bad one. The console failed to gain traction, and Soulcalibur sold only 1 million copies worldwide. By comparison, Tekken 3, which came out the same year, sold 8 times more on PlayStation. Its sequel, Soulcalibur 2, was another all-timer by Project Soul. This time, it was released on all popular 6th generation consoles, PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox, skipping Dreamcast ironically. Soulcalibur 3 followed not long after, and it's still remembered fondly. But with Soulcalibur 4, things started to get weird. It came out in 2008 after a longer than usual development cycle. Developers managed to adapt to the notoriously hard to develop 4 infrastructure of the 7th gen consoles and made a game that looked stunning and played really well. Some criticism was drawn to the platform exclusivity of the different Star Wars guest characters and the inclusion of Yoda at all due to his short stature, but the entry was well received. When making Soulcalibur 4, the devs were under the impression that this would be the final game in the series, and this was the moment when Harada saved the series for the first time. He stepped in and confirmed there would be further Soulcalibur games if there is enough interest. As you may know, there was, and what we got was Soulcalibur 5, the most controversial game in the series. In the eyes of regular consumers, it did exactly 2 things wrong. First, gameplay-wise, it became faster than its predecessor, but still felt like an incremental update over 4, and second, the developers in their infinite wisdom decided to get rid of many beloved and fan-favorite characters and add their children and apprentices instead. This move puzzled everyone, and alienated those who would have bought the game otherwise. Soulcalibur 6, the 7th entry in the franchise, was a soft reboot of sorts. Gone were all the Gen Z characters, and we got all the favorites back instead, with a couple of newcomers. Story-wise, this was a retelling of the events of Soulcalibur in the new continuity. The devs even got Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher series as a guest to get more audience eyeballs, and it worked. 2 million copies sold, several award nominations, and public praise. But unlike Tekken 7, which was released earlier, its peak didn't last. On the one hand, people weren't really sure how to feel about the new reversal edge mechanic. They hated it. It had several design and balance issues. It was intended to help out newcomers, but it served the opposite nature. It's a knowledge check on which moves to use to crush it, or how and when to sidestep it due to its inherent verticality. They're used to get more meter, but they really break the flow of the game. And more meter gives the ability to use critical edges, which break the flow themselves. This meter, Soul Gauge, is also a problem itself with how many mechanics are bound to it. The aforementioned critical edge, Brave Edge, Soul Charge, Soul Attack, and Resist Impact. But the biggest and most glaring issue Soulcalibur 6 had was the netcode. You see, it was always important for a fighting game with online functionality to have a decent connection, and for a good while, delay-based netcode was the go-to solution. But towards the end of the 2010s, more and more games started adopting the rollback netcode, making delay-based obsolete. And while Soulcalibur 6 could have scraped by with the latter, Tekken 7 did it after all. The issue was that its delay-based netcode was a special kind of bad. And so, people just stopped playing the game. Its Steam player base release peak of 14,000 players turned into 1,000 in just a couple of months and never recovered. Last year, the game barely reached 400 daily players. This looks like a sad end of a series that produced several all-time great fighting games. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. Tekken 7 was the first 3D fighting game made by Bandai Namco with the use of a third-party engine, Unreal 4 in this case. When Soulcalibur 6 came out a few years ago, it was far ahead in terms of the tech than its Tekken brother. The models, the geometry, the gameplay interactions, as many devs already had good knowledge of the engine, and there is quite a bit of overlap between the Tekken and Soulcalibur staff. It stands to reason that many of the lessons learned by these developers were implemented in Tekken 8, despite it being made on a new version of Unreal Engine, UE5. Unreal Engine is made with ease of use in mind, so it never abandons the old tech. Look at it like your phone operating system upgrade. You get new features when you move on to the new iOS or Android, but all the old ones remain there. Tekken 8 makes extensive use of the graphical capabilities of UE5, even without tapping into its groundbreaking nanite tech. In Tekken 7, stages had essentially two stages for the floor and the environment, normal and broken, with no further variance. Floor tilings broke in the general area of the hit, and when a stall at Soup got smashed to bits, it just scattered its goods with no further interactivity. In Tekken 8, when you destroy the hot dog stand at the New York stage and scatter the hot dog bun several times, annihilate the phone booth, the barriers, scratch the lamppost, and dent the ground now actually correspond with the place your opponent fell on. Each and every element of the environment is destructible, and the level of clutter that it creates is unparalleled. This could be advanced further in the possible Soulcalibur 7 with the nanite virtualized geometry, the mesh and rendering technology of the engine, allowing the devs to bring the level of detail at the stages to unprecedented levels, to have the environment be destructible in different ways, poked full of holes by Amy, sliced with precise cuts by Mitsurugi, cleaved in half by Siegfried, or completely smashed to bits by Astaroth. The tech is already there, and such an implementation could help immersion really well. This could be extended to the character models as well. Instead of exploding into a fiery explosion of armor bits, the outfit destruction could be gradual and dependent on where the character is actually getting hit. Soulcalibur 7 could also benefit from the Lumen technology of Unreal Engine 5. It's a tech that replaces the default baked-in light sources, improves the light bouncing off different surfaces, and casts more realistic shadows. In a series where the characters wear different kinds of shiny armor and wield big blades, it could help the visuals further. It's not as good as path tracing modern GPUs are capable of supporting, but it uses software ray tracing, so it could be supported on platforms that don't have hardware ray tracing capabilities. Furthermore, the devs could opt for baked-in light sources on stages like a poorly lit dungeon, while still utilizing the lumen reflections and have deep, real-time shadows with another UE tech, virtual shadow maps. Michael Murray has previously stated that for Tekken 8, the devs didn't reuse a single Tekken 7 asset for the character models, building them all from scratch. They had a trial and error phase, but eventually all the models turned out to be like they wanted, and if we compare them to Tekken 7's, there's literally no contest. Soulcalibur 7 could really benefit from a facelift akin to Tekken 8, as while the models themselves weren't bad in Soulcalibur 6, the faces the characters had were weird and droopy, not resembling the official art in proportions at all. While it's doubtful that they'd simply copy the models made for Tekken 8, they could be used as templates for further modifications, and the general know-how of character modeling shouldn't be underestimated either. With all of this, the developers would also be able to improve something that the series is already widely known for: Create a Soul. It could be the ultimate character customization system across any fighting game. If you take a look at Tekken 8's cosmetics, you'll see that non-original attire fits the models better than ever. It's no longer bulky or floating above the model itself. Yeah, it's not quite as good as the bespoke outfits the developers made themselves, but we've never been this close. And now just think how much could this benefit Soulcalibur with its many layers of clothing, armor, and accessories. You'd be able to create a fighter of your dreams, or well, an abomination of your nightmares. Don't even try to deny this. We all know how much you love your Create Soul nightmare fuel. UE5 could also allow Soulcalibur 7 to have incredibly detailed, well-lit, and interactive stages, not restricted to just square or round shapes, and make them freeform with different walls and pits. Although, one should always keep in mind not to give player 1 or player 2 any unfair advantage. However, we should keep in mind that Unreal Engine 5 is just a graphical and physics engine, with animations, scripting, and all gameplay related stuff still made using Bandai Namco's proprietary in-house tech. The development team recognized what the biggest core issue plaguing Tekken 7 was. Defensive play was way too effective and rewarding, and fixed it for the next game by making it much more aggressive and fast. Heat mode was coded in such a way that a player could activate it with a dedicated button or after a specific attack, pressing their advantage. Something vaguely similar existed in Soulcalibur 6 when some characters activated a reversal edge after a basic BBB string, but unlike Tekken, it slowed down the flow of the game with its 4D, underwater, reverse, rock, paper, scissors mechanics. The way of eliminating the systems that either work too well, lots of things tied into the soul gauge meter, or are annoying, the aforementioned reversal edge, is the way to go to bring back some speed and fluidity into Soulcalibur. If you think about it, the series has always been a faster Tekken that has fewer juggles, a high focus on movement, a more basic game plan, and is generally much more newbie friendly. We would suggest getting rid of reversal edge completely, decoupling some of the systems from the meter or getting rid of it entirely, and focusing more on the basics of what made Soulcalibur a household name. The series has reinvented itself previously, it will be able to handle another one with no sweat. Instead, the character should have more options that lean into their identities, not mechanics that played out in a similar fashion no matter who you play as. Tekken 8's gameplay framework could be an ideal foundation for this. Like Tekken 8 shed its visual legacy from Tekken 7, Soulcalibur should do the same with 6, but regarding its gameplay. We're no game designers, so if the back to the basics approach isn't enough, there are other options that are less likely to please the remaining fans or the Tekken converts, like even more movement options with a wider variety of attacks attached to them. But all of this would be in vain if the game has poor connectivity. We tried Tekken 8 at every stage. Closed network tests, closed beta tests, the demo, and thankfully, Bandai Namco largely fixed their issues with netcode. And while its rollback implementation isn't the best we've ever seen, if the exact same tech is applied to Soulcalibur 7, the game will have a global reach the series fans have only dreamt of. This will open new doors for the players from the countries without dedicated communities, as they'll be much more likely to get decent matches with their neighbors or with someone in their general corner of the earth. At this point, we'd be inclined to believe that Soulcalibur 7 would be much more successful than 6, based on the merits we mentioned already, but it can do better. Tekken's brand recognition is at an all-time high, and it could very well help market Soulcalibur 7 on top of its own merits. Akira Nishitani's studio that helped out with Tekken 7 and is working on Tekken 8 could also be brought in to support the title. Soulcalibur always had a name that sold copies, but attaching Harada's name to it and maybe highlighting that the franchises are closer than ever could push this recognition further. We know it sounds almost humiliating that it need to resort to that, but what can you do if the alternative is, simply put, the death of the series? And it's not like there's nothing Soulcalibur could do to attract people. As we mentioned, it's more approachable than Tekken, and some of the focus could be shifted to that, especially if there are gameplay changes to accommodate for it. The series could also lean more into what Tekken hesitates to do, add more guest characters. The devs were able to integrate Geralt of Rivia into the setting seamlessly, and while someone like 2B doesn't exactly scream medieval fighter to us, her gameplay was unique and fun. Who wouldn't want to see Jin Sakai fight against his natural foil, Mitsurugi? And since we agreed that this should be another soft reboot, why not get Kratos back once more? Melania, Blade of Mikola, styling on her opponents with the waterfowl dance. Clive Rossfield, transforming into Ifrit during his critical edge. Xenos Ye Galvus, looking for a worthy opponent to sate his battle-sexual tendencies. Dante from the Devil May Cry series being Dante from the Devil May Cry series. The possibilities are endless. They could even bring back Heihachi for old time's sake, but probably not since his voice actor passed away. An additional thing Harada could bring over is the authenticity of the characters' backgrounds, their weapons, and their fighting styles. And for the record, we don't think that Soulcalibur lacks in this department. On the contrary, through the years, the series was able to represent quite a wide variety of weaponry and arts of wielding them, while being an over-the-top fantasy fighting game. But there's always room to add more. A nimble and agile acrobat wielding a rope dart, or in a similar vein, Taki's rival ninja with a Kusari Fundo or a Sarujan. There's a distinct lack of axe users in the series, so a Northman using a Dane axe in a pure offensive form would be a cool addition. Looking at JP's design in Street Fighter 6 gave us an idea, a posh English gentleman with a cane sword. Setsuka shouldn't have a monopoly on hiding weapons and objects. A fighter from Northeast Africa using a Kopesh or a shuttle. Or screw the continuity and have an Aztec Jaguar wielding a Makawik. Again, the possibilities are endless. Maybe it's our bias and love for 3D fighters speaking, but Bandai Namco should really consider the upsides of making the next Soulcalibur so that the slipstream generated by its hype could drag it along to major mainstream popularity. As we discussed, there are several upsides. The tech is there, the development know-how is also present, and the series has enough going on its own to draw the numbers at least comparable to the previous entry, which was deemed successful by the company. So unless this comment was facetious, and the internal expectation is that people took Soulcalibur 6's untimely death as never again, there's no reason not to make a new Soulcalibur. Come on, Harada. Oh wait.
Don't ask me for shit.